Sleep is not rest, it's repair. That idea alone reframes how we should think about 1/3 of our lives. For most of human history, sleep was seen as passive, as the absence of consciousness or productivity. In modern life, it's often treated as a negotiable cost, something we can compress, defer, or make up for later. But biologically, that's a catastrophic misunderstanding. Sleep is not a break from life, it's the process that sustains it. During sleep, the body enters an orchestrated sequence of physiological states that enable repair, regulation, and renewal. Each stage of sleep serves a distinct biological purpose. Deep, slow wave sleep, what's often called N3, is dominated by parasympathetic activity. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, body temperature decreases. This is when growth hormone surges, driving tissue repair, protein synthesis, and cellular regeneration. If you lift weights, run marathons, or simply live with the physical stress of modern life, this phase is where recovery actually happens. Without it, the microtears in muscle don't fully heal, glycogen stores don't replenish, and inflammation lingers. The body doesn't adapt to training, it breaks down from it. REM sleep. The dreaming stage is equally essential, but for the brain. Here, synaptic connections are remodeled, emotional experiences are processed, and memories are consolidated. It's where the brain integrates learning, linking new information with existing neural networks. Studies using functional MRI show that regions involved in emotional regulation, particularly the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, communicate more effectively after adequate REM sleep. When you're sleep deprived, that communication falters. The result is emotional volatility, impulsivity, and reduced capacity for rational decision making. We don't just become tired, we become less human in our ability to regulate behavior. The repair function of sleep extends far beyond the muscular or neurological. It's deeply hormonal. Growth hormone pulses almost exclusively during deep sleep, and its absence can't be compensated for during wakefulness. Testosterone, both in men and women, follows a circadian rhythm that's intimately tied to sleep quality and duration. Fragmented or shortened sleep suppresses its nocturnal rise, leading to lower baseline levels the next day. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, also depends on sleep timing. It should peak in the morning and taper off throughout the day, but poor sleep disrupts that curve, creating elevated cortisol at night and sluggish release in the morning. That misalignment erodes metabolic health, increases fat deposition, and impairs immune function. The metabolic repair that happens during sleep is another layer of the story. The brain, though only about 2% of body mass, consumes roughly 20% of total energy. During wakefulness, it generates waste products, particularly beta amyloid and tau proteins, the same ones implicated in Alzheimer's disease. The brain's lymphatic system, a kind of waste clearance network, is 10 times more active during sleep than when awake. Cerebrospinal fluid flushes through the brain's interstitial spaces, clearing debris and restoring chemical balance. Without enough deep sleep, that system underperforms and waste accumulates. You could think of it like skipping oil changes for your brain. The machinery still runs, but it runs dirtier, hotter, and less efficiently. At the cellular level, sleep modulates mitochondrial function and oxidative stress. Mitochondria, the energy factories of our cells, rely on restorative periods to repair their own DNA and membranes. Chronic sleep restriction leads to mitochondrial dysfunction, increasing reactive oxygen species and accelerating cellular aging. It's one reason why chronic insomniacs and shift workers often show biomarkers of metabolic disease and inflammation decades earlier than their peers. Sleep also fine-tunes immune function. During deep sleep, cytokine production increases, promoting immune readiness and memory. That's why vaccines are more effective in well-rested individuals. The immune system literally learns better when it's had adequate sleep. Conversely, a week of restricted sleep can reduce natural killer cell activity by as much as 70%, a profound hit to our first line of defense against infection and even cancer surveillance. Every one of these processes, hormonal balance, cellular repair, immune regulation, metabolic clearance, requires time in specific sleep stages. When we truncate sleep, we don't just lose hours, we lose phases. You can't compress deep sleep into a shorter window, and the sequence of sleep cycles matters. That's why sleeping 5 hours a night, even if it feels sufficient in the short term, slowly degrades performance and health over time. You might still function, but you're operating with a system that's quietly decaying underneath the surface. So sleep is not rest in the casual sense. Rest implies stillness, sleep is activity. It's an intricate biological choreography, a nightly reset that determines how well we heal, think, and adapt. When you view it through that lens, sacrificing sleep isn't a sign of dedication or toughness. It's biological self-sabotage disguised as productivity. Even modest sleep restriction can destabilize the entire hormonal landscape, creating what might be called hormonal chaos. The endocrine system is extraordinarily sensitive to circadian rhythm and sleep architecture. When that rhythm is disrupted, even by an hour or two each night, the hormonal symphony that regulates metabolism, reproduction, stress and recovery begins to unravel. What makes this so insidious is that the early effects are subtle. You might not feel dramatically different after a few nights of poor sleep, but under the surface, hormones that govern your energy, appetite, and cellular repair have already shifted in ways that promote decline rather than adaptation. One of the most striking examples is cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Under normal conditions, cortisol follows a diurnal rhythm, peaking shortly after waking and declining throughout the day to reach its lowest point before sleep. This rhythm helps us feel alert in the morning and allows the body to wind down at night. Sleep deprivation flattens that curve. Cortisol stays elevated well into the evening, which impairs the onset of deep sleep and creates a vicious cycle. Less sleep leads to more cortisol, which in turn makes sleep even more fragmented. Chronically high cortisol promotes gluconeogenesis and increases insulin resistance, which means more circulating glucose and a higher likelihood of storing fat rather than burning it. It also suppresses immune function, increases inflammation, and can blunt the anabolic effects of exercise. Over time, this chronic stress signaling reshapes body composition and accelerates aging at the cellular level. Testosterone is another major casualty of sleep loss. Several studies show that men who sleep less than 5 hours a night for 1 week experience testosterone reductions equivalent to 10 to 15 years of aging. This decline isn't limited to men. Women also see diminished androgen levels, which affects libido, mood, and lean mass preservation. The mechanism is primarily linked to disruption of the luteinizing hormones. LH pulse, which normally peaks during sleep. Without sufficient sleep, and specifically without adequate slow wave sleep, LH secretion drops and testosterone follows. The result is reduced muscle protein synthesis, slower recovery, and impaired motivation for physical activity. That's one reason people who sleep poorly often report both lower energy and diminished drive to exercise, which compounds the metabolic effects of hormonal imbalance. Growth hormone, another critical player, follows a similar pattern. Roughly 70% of daily growth hormone secretion occurs during the first period of deep sleep. This hormone stimulates tissue repair, supports immune function, and helps maintain lean body mass. Fragmented or shortened sleep cuts those pulses short, leaving the body in a state of chronic under repair. Athletes notice this most clearly in prolonged soreness and slower adaptation to training, but it's just as relevant for anyone managing everyday physical or psychological stress. Without proper growth hormone release, recovery becomes inefficient, and over time, microdamage accumulates into macro problems, joint pain, fatigue, even insulin resistance. Sleep deprivation also disturbs the delicate balance between hunger and satiety hormones, specifically leptin and ghrelin. Ghrelin, which stimulates appetite, rises when sleep is curtailed, while leptin, which signals fullness, falls. The result is a hormonal profile that pushes you to eat more and prefer calorie-dense, high carbohydrate foods. It's not simply a matter of willpower, it's physiology. Your brain's hypothalamus interprets sleep deprivation as a form of energy deficit and drives compensatory hunger. Combine that with cortisol-induced insulin resistance and a sluggish metabolic rate, and you have the perfect hormonal recipe for fat gain. Thyroid hormones also feel the impact. The hypothalamic pituitary, thyroid's HPT axis becomes less responsive when sleep is consistently disrupted. Levels of thyroid stimulating hormone, TSA, drop, and conversion of T4 to active T3 slows. This can manifest as fatigue, cold intolerance, and reduced basal metabolic rate, symptoms often mistaken for overtraining or dietary issues. In reality, they're signals of a body running on incomplete recovery. All these hormonal shifts, cortisol rising, testosterone and growth hormone falling, leptin decreasing, ghrelin increasing, create a state of metabolic confusion. The body is, in essence, misreading its own signals, thinks it's under threat, even when external stressors are minimal. It prioritizes short-term survival over long-term repair, pushing resources toward glucose availability and away from anabolic processes. That trade-off might be adaptive in a crisis, but when it becomes chronic, it leads to deterioration, fat gain, muscle loss, inflammation, and impaired cognition. When people say they can function fine on 5 or 6 hours of sleep, what they often mean is they can survive on it. But hormonally, they're operating with a biochemical profile that mimics aging, chronic stress, and mild metabolic disease. The shift happens quietly day after day as sleep restriction reshapes the body's internal signals. The irony is that we often chase hormonal optimization through diet, supplements, or medication while neglecting the simplest, most potent intervention available. Consistent, sufficient, high-quality sleep. Metabolic dysfunction rarely starts with what we eat. It starts with how we sleep. The body's ability to regulate glucose, store energy, and manage appetite depends on an intricate interplay of hormones that are synchronized with the circadian rhythm. When sleep is cut short or fragmented, that rhythm falls out of tune. The consequences ripple through every metabolic pathway, from insulin sensitivity to fat oxidation to appetite control. What looks like poor dietary discipline is often a downstream effect of disrupted sleep biology. Insulin sensitivity is one of the first systems to falter when sleep is restricted. Studies have shown that just 4 to 5 nights of sleeping fewer than 6 hours can reduce insulin sensitivity by as much as 20 to 30%. In practical terms, that means your body needs more insulin to handle the same amount of glucose, and elevated insulin levels make it harder to access stored fat for energy. Over time, this state of insulin resistance leads to elevated fasting glucose, increased triglycerides, and a gradual shift toward fat storage, even if total calorie intake hasn't changed. It's not that your diet suddenly got worse. It's that your metabolism stopped listening properly to the signals it's supposed to respond to. At the center of this metabolic disruption are two hormones that regulate hunger and satiety, ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin, produced mainly in the stomach, rises before meals to stimulate appetite. Leptin, secreted by fat cells, tells the brain when you've had enough. Under conditions of adequate sleep, these hormones fluctuate predictably, helping maintain energy balance. But after a night or two of poor sleep, ghrelin levels rise, leptin levels drop, and the brain interprets that as starvation. You feel hungrier, particularly for calorie-dense, carbohydrate-rich foods. This isn't a matter of weak willpower. It's neuroendocrine signaling gone away. The prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate decision-making, is less active during sleep deprivation, while the amygdala, the brain's reward center, becomes more reactive to food stimuli. The net effect is simple: food looks better, it tastes better, and resisting it feels harder. The circadian rhythm also governs the timing of metabolic processes. Each cell has its own clock, driven by clock genes that regulate when enzymes for fat or glucose metabolism are expressed. These cellular clocks are synchronized by the master clock in the brain, which depends on light exposure during the day and darkness at night. When sleep schedules are erratic or shortened, this synchronization breaks down. The pancreas may still be releasing insulin late at night when the liver and muscles have already shifted into rest mode. The result is metabolic noise. Glucose remains in circulation longer, lipids accumulate, and oxidative stress increases. This is one reason shift workers who often sleep at irregular hours have significantly higher rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes, even when controlling for diet. Sleep also influences energy expenditure. The body's resting metabolic rate, the energy burned at rest, can decrease by roughly 5 to 10% after just a few nights of inadequate sleep. That translates to around 100 to 200 calories a day, a seemingly minor deficit that compounds over time. Meanwhile, the type of weight loss during calorie restriction changes dramatically depending on sleep quality. In one controlled study, individuals on the same calorie restricted diet lost about 50% less fat and 50% more lean tissue when sleep deprived compared to when they slept adequately. The implication is profound. Without sufficient sleep, the body not only resists fat loss, but cannibalizes its own muscle as an energy source. The connection between sleep and metabolism extends to how the brain regulates glucose use. The brain relies almost exclusively on glucose for fuel, but during sleep deprivation, it becomes less efficient at using it. Functional imaging studies show reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex and increased activation in limbic regions that drive impulsive behavior. That means poor sleep doesn't just make you hungrier, it impairs your ability to make rational food choices. You crave simple carbohydrates because they offer quick dopamine and glucose spikes that temporarily offset the brain's energy deficit. But those same spikes worsen insulin resistance, perpetuating a cycle of fatigue and overeating. Another overlooked element is the role of the gut. Sleep disruption alters the composition of gut microbiota, decreasing microbial diversity and increasing populations associated with inflammation and metabolic disease. These changes occur within days and feed back into metabolic regulation through the gut-brain axis. Inflammatory cytokines rise, intestinal permeability increases, and signaling through the vagus nerve becomes dysregulated. The gut, much like the rest of the body, follows a circadian rhythm, and irregular sleep patterns confuse its timing cues, leading to poor nutrient absorption and systemic inflammation. When viewed through this lens, the advice to eat less and move more is incomplete. Metabolic health doesn't begin with the fork or the gym, it begins with the pillow. The most carefully constructed diet can't overcome the hormonal chaos created by sleep deprivation. Without adequate sleep, insulin doesn't work properly, appetite regulation fails, and energy metabolism drifts into dysfunction. What we often call a lack of willpower is really a biological imbalance, the result of a body and brain operating out of sync with their evolutionary rhythm. The idea that we can out-train bad sleep is one of the most persistent myths in modern fitness culture. It comes from the belief that discipline and effort can override biology, that more training, more intensity, or more willpower can somehow compensate for inadequate recovery. But the body doesn't work that way. Training is only a stimulus. Adaptation, the actual improvement in strength, endurance, and body composition happens during recovery, and sleep is the foundation of that recovery. When sleep is compromised, the physiological machinery that translates effort into progress begins to fail, no matter how perfect the diet or how rigorous the workout. At the cellular level, muscle repair and growth depend on protein synthesis, a process regulated by hormones like growth hormone, testosterone, and insulin like growth factor 1's IGF-1. These hormones peak during deep sleep, particularly in the early part of the night when slow wave sleep dominates. When sleep is shortened or fragmented, those hormonal pulses are blunted. The result is slower tissue repair, reduced muscle hypertrophy, and higher susceptibility to injury. Over time, the same training load that once produced gains begins to erode performance because the recovery systems are no longer keeping up with the stress being applied. It's like trying to build muscle while the body's construction crew is only half on duty. Cortisol plays a major role here as well. Training is a form of stress, a controlled and beneficial one when followed by proper recovery. But when sleep is lacking, cortisol levels remain elevated beyond their natural rhythm. Elevated cortisol promotes protein breakdown, increases gluconeogenesis, and reduces muscle glycogen repletion. It essentially shifts the body to a catabolic state, prioritizing short-term energy over long-term repair. For athletes or anyone exercising regularly, this creates a paradox. The more they train under sleep-deprived conditions, the more they deplete their energy reserves and the less their body adapts. Subjectively, it feels like stagnation or burnout. Workouts feel harder, motivation dips, and progress stalls despite increasing effort. Another subtle but powerful consequence of poor sleep is its effect on substrate utilization, the body's choice between burning fat or carbohydrates for energy. Sleep deprivation tilts this balance toward carbohydrate dependence, meaning the body relies more on glucose and less on fat oxidation during exercise. This is problematic for anyone trying to improve metabolic flexibility or lose fat. Even if calorie intake is controlled, the hormonal environment created by sleep loss, high cortisol, reduced insulin sensitivity, and lower growth hormone makes fat oxidation inefficient. Instead of using stored fat for fuel, the body conserves it while breaking down lean tissue for energy. The scale might move, but the composition shifts in the wrong direction: less muscle, more fat retention. Inflammation also rises in response to inadequate sleep, which has direct implications for recovery and training outcomes. Pro-inflammatory cytokines such as IL-6 and TNF-alpha increase, impairing muscle repair and joint recovery. This systemic inflammation makes small aches linger longer and reduces resilience to microtrauma. Even minor training loads can start to feel like overtraining because the body's repair mechanisms are sluggish. Meanwhile, the immune system becomes less efficient, leaving athletes more prone to illness, another factor that quietly derails consistency and performance. Sleep also influences the central nervous system in ways that directly affect coordination, reaction time, and motor learning. Deep and REM sleep are essential for consolidating neuromuscular patterns, the brain's ability to refine movement efficiency and skill execution. When sleep is compromised, neural firing patterns become less synchronized and motor control suffers. This doesn't just mean slower reaction times, it means increased injury risk and poor technical performance. A fatigued brain misjudges force, timing, and balance, turning even routine exercises into potential hazards. The cognitive side of performance, focused decision-making motivation, also degrades, compounding the physical limitations. Energy balance is another overlooked casualty. Sleep-deprived individuals experience reduced leptin and elevated ghrelin levels, leading to increased hunger and lower satiety. For athletes, that often means overeating or consuming suboptimal foods, undermining body composition goals. In a sleep-deprived state, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-regulation, is less active, while the brain's reward centers become more responsive to high-calorie foods. This is why late night cravings and poor dietary control often accompany inadequate sleep. The net effect is that even when someone trains hard, their energy intake and storage shift in favor of fat gain and recovery stagnation. The interaction between training, recovery, and sleep forms a closed loop. Training creates stress, recovery repairs it, and sleep integrates the adaptation. When one link in that chain fails, the entire system loses efficiency. Chronic sleep restriction effectively places the body in a state of perpetual low-grade overtraining. Performance plateaus, motivation fades, and the risk of injury and burnout climbs. The harder one pushes without addressing sleep, the deeper the deficit becomes. There's no supplement or training hack that can replace what sleep does naturally: regulate hormones, repair tissue, and restore neural balance. The misconception that effort can override recovery stems from misunderstanding the purpose of training. Exercise is not what makes us fitter, recovery is. Training breaks the body down and sleep rebuilds it stronger. Without that rebuilding phase, all that effort becomes damage, not progress. You can train, eat, and supplement perfectly, but without adequate, high-quality sleep, the physiological machinery that turns that work into adaptation never fully switches on. Sleep is the most potent legal performance enhancer available, and yet it's the one most consistently neglected. When we think about performance, we tend to focus on physical training, nutrition, or even supplementation, but none of those interventions can rival the impact of a single night of quality sleep. Every domain of human performance, cognitive, emotional, and physical, depends on the restorative functions of sleep. It's not just about feeling rested, it's about optimizing how the body and brain process information, regulate energy, and respond to stress. The absence of sleep doesn't merely make us tired, it makes us less capable, less resilient, and less precise in everything we do. From a cognitive standpoint, sleep is when the brain consolidates memory, refines skills, and enhances decision-making. During wakefulness, the brain absorbs enormous amounts of information, but that data remains largely disorganized until it's processed during sleep. Specifically, deep, slow, wave sleep stabilizes factual and procedural memories, while REM sleep integrates them, connecting new experiences to existing knowledge networks. This process makes learning more efficient and creative problem solving more likely. In sleep-deprived states, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, focus, and self-control, becomes hypoactive. Meanwhile, the amygdala, which governs emotion and threat detection, becomes hyperactive. That imbalance leads to exaggerated emotional responses, poor judgment, and impulsivity. In practical terms, you make worse decisions, overreact to stress, and struggle to focus on complex tasks. Reaction time is one of the most quantifiable markers of cognitive performance, and it deteriorates rapidly with sleep loss. Research comparing 24 hours of wakefulness to alcohol consumption shows that staying awake that long impairs reaction time and coordination as much as having a blood alcohol concentration of 0.1%, legally drunk in most places. Athletes, pilots, surgeons, and executives all face the same physiological limitation. The brain cannot maintain high precision without adequate rest. Even small deficits matter. Losing just 90 minutes of sleep reduces vigilance and reaction speed the next day. In a performance setting, that can be the difference between success and failure, between safety and injury. Sleep also affects how efficiently the body uses energy. During deep sleep, muscle glycogen stores are replenished, mitochondria repair themselves, and the body stress response resets. Without enough sleep, glycogen restoration becomes incomplete, which means endurance and strength performance drop even when training and nutrition remain consistent. The sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, stays overactive, keeping heart rate and blood pressure elevated. That chronic overactivation limits heart rate variability, a key measure of recovery and resilience. You might feel restless, edgy, or overly amped during workouts, but performance metrics tell another story: lower power output, slower recovery, and diminished aerobic capacity. REM sleep, which dominates the latter half of the night, is particularly important for coordination and motor learning. During this phase, the brain replays movement patterns learned during the day, refining them in neural circuits. That's why athletes who prioritize sleep show greater improvements in accuracy, timing, and technique. When REM sleep is curtailed, these adaptations stall. The brain essentially forgets part of what it learned, forcing the individual to relearn skills that should have been consolidated overnight. This applies beyond sports, to musicians, surgeons, or anyone engaged in fine motor work. Sleep transforms repetition into mastery. Without it, practice becomes far less efficient. Emotionally, sleep acts as a regulator, recalibrating how we respond to challenges. Well-rested individuals exhibit greater prefrontal control over the amygdala, meaning they can stay calm under pressure and think clearly in high-stress environments. Sleep-deprived individuals, by contrast, have amygdalas that fire 60% more intensely in response to negative stimuli. That overreaction translates into irritability, anxiety, and reduced tolerance for frustration. For anyone performing in a high-stakes or collaborative environment, those emotional fluctuations can erode decision quality, relationships, and leadership capacity. Sleep deprivation also alters perception of effort. Studies on athletes show that when participants are deprived of sleep, their rating of perceived exertion, how hard an activity feels, rises even when objective workload remains the same. That means fatigue sets in faster and motivation drops sooner. The body isn't necessarily weaker. It's the brain that's less capable of tolerating discomfort. That psychological edge, which separates elite performers from the average, is heavily dependent on sleep. Another underappreciated dimension is immune and endocrine resilience. Poor sleep weakens immune response, increases inflammation, and alters testosterone and growth hormone release, all of which impair recovery. The result is not just reduced performance, but slower adaptation. You can do the same training volume, but the improvements will be smaller because the body doesn't have the hormonal or cellular environment needed to supercompensate. What's remarkable is how reversible these effects are. Even a single night of full, high-quality sleep can restore insulin sensitivity, lower cortisol, and normalize reaction time. That's why sleep is the ultimate performance enhancer, because its effects are both profound and immediate. It doesn't require a prescription or a complex protocol. It simply requires consistency. High performers across every field, from Olympic athletes to chess grandmasters, leverage sleep as a competitive advantage. It sharpens cognition, refines skill, stabilizes emotion, and accelerates physical repair. Nothing else delivers that combination of benefits so efficiently or so universally. Longevity isn't simply about extending the number of years we live. It's about preserving the quality of those years, the ability to think clearly, move freely, and adapt to life's demands. Sleep sits at the center of that equation, not as a passive state, but as an active process that maintains the systems responsible for long-term vitality. The irony is that while most people obsess over diet, exercise, and supplements in the pursuit of longevity, the single behavior that influences nearly every marker of aging, sleep, is often treated as optional, yet no intervention, pharmaceutical or otherwise, matches the systemic repair and recalibration that occurs during a single night of restorative sleep. Aging can be viewed as the gradual accumulation of damage, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, genomic instability, and chronic inflammation. Sleep is the body's primary defense against that accumulation. During deep sleep, the brain and body engage in coordinated maintenance work. Reactive oxygen species are neutralized, DNA repair mechanisms activate, and the glymphatic system flushes out metabolic waste from neural tissue. Beta amyloid and tau, proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease, are cleared at rates up to twice as high during sleep as during wakefulness. When sleep is curtailed, those waste products linger, subtly impairing neural communication and cognitive function over time. This process doesn't announce itself with immediate symptoms. It unfolds quietly year after year as the brain becomes less efficient at self-cleaning. Mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles within our cells, also rely on sleep for their maintenance. During wakefulness, they accumulate oxidative damage, but deep sleep provides a window for repair and biogenesis, the creation of new healthy mitochondria. Chronic sleep deprivation disrupts this cycle, leading to mitochondrial dysfunction, reduced ATP production, and increased oxidative stress. These effects manifest as fatigue, insulin resistance, and accelerated cellular aging. The same mechanisms that preserve athletic performance in youth are those that sustain energy and cognitive resilience later in life. Sleep, therefore, isn't just about feeling rested tomorrow. It's about maintaining the cellular efficiency that determines how we age. Hormonal balance plays an equally central role in longevity, and sleep regulates virtually every key hormone involved in metabolic and reproductive health. Growth hormone, testosterone, melatonin, and cortisol all follow circadian rhythms anchored to the sleep-wake cycle. Deep sleep promotes anabolic hormone secretion, while REM sleep fine-tunes the neural and emotional systems that manage stress. When sleep is inconsistent or insufficient, cortisol levels remain elevated, testosterone and growth hormone decline, and insulin sensitivity deteriorates. This hormonal profile resembles that of premature aging, higher fat mass, lower muscle mass, and diminished resilience to stress. The consequences compound over decades, shaping how quickly or slowly the body moves through its biological timeline. Cardiovascular health is another domain profoundly influenced by sleep. Each night, blood pressure dips by roughly 10 to 20% during what's known as nocturnal dipping, giving the vascular system a period of rest. When sleep is shortened, fragmented, or irregular, that dipping fails to occur. The heart and blood vessels remain under continuous pressure, leading to endothelial dysfunction and arterial stiffness. Epidemiological studies consistently show that chronic short sleepers, those averaging fewer than 6 hours per night, have higher rates of hypertension, coronary artery disease, and stroke. These aren't just statistical correlations, they reflect direct physiological stress from unrelieved sympathetic activation. Sleep also governs metabolic efficiency, which in turn influences how gracefully we age. Poor sleep disrupts glucose metabolism, reduces leptin levels, increases ghrelin, and promotes weight gain. Over time, that metabolic dysregulation feeds into systemic inflammation, one of the core drivers of aging. Inflammation accelerates telomere shortening, the process that gradually limits cellular replication. Individuals who consistently sleep 7 to 8 hours a night show longer telomeres on average compared to those who sleep 5 or fewer. The implication is profound. Sleep doesn't just correlate with longevity, it mechanistically supports it at the level of cellular replication and repair. Cognitive longevity is equally dependent on sleep. The neuroplasticity that supports learning, creativity, and memory consolidation depends on nightly cycles of deep and REM sleep. Deep sleep stabilizes new memories, REM sleep integrates them, linking abstract concepts and emotional associations. Without adequate sleep, the brain becomes less adaptable, less able to learn new skills, solve complex problems, or regulate mood. Over decades, that rigidity compounds, contributing to cognitive decline and neurodegenerative disease. Sleep is not simply restorative for the brain, it's generative, ensuring that neural networks remain flexible and resilient. Emotional resilience A critical but often overlooked aspect of healthy aging also relies on sleep. Well-rested individuals maintain better prefrontal control over limbic reactivity, allowing them to handle stress and interpersonal challenges with greater composure. Chronic sleep loss erodes that regulation, amplifying negative emotional responses and lowering tolerance for stress. Over time, that emotional volatility feeds into chronic sympathetic activation, which worsens metabolic and cardiovascular health. The mind and body are not separate systems. Sleep binds them together through shared regulatory mechanisms. Ultimately, the ability to stay capable, physically strong, mentally sharp, and emotionally balanced hinges on consistent, high-quality sleep. Longevity isn't about adding years to life. It's about preserving function within those years. Sleep does more than extend time. It enhances the quality of that time by maintaining the integrity of the systems that keep us human: cognition, metabolism, immunity, and emotion. Neglecting it accelerates decline. Protecting it slows the trajectory of aging itself.